Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's going to be a wild ride. GG, mother.
Right, this is another episode of Strat Book. Our guest here is going to be Threat, the coach of Ninjas in Pajamas. Right, Threat, there's a lot we could discuss on this episode because obviously you come from back in the 1.6 days, even though people don't actually know that part of your career as much. So one thing I like to do, LEGIJA might have noticed this as a trend, is when we talk to a lot of the different in-game leaders or coaches, I often try to tie it into like what region they're from, because that makes it more interesting to me if they're like an outsider, if they're like the traditional style of in-game leader. And I've actually always seen you, I know Lopez has a similar perspective, we always saw you as a little bit different in the Swedish scene, because the Swedish scene most famously, it's a lot like what the Fnatic and the previous NiP players are like in CSGO. Like, they like to play more like default style. They just like to play off their skill. They all practice a lot, hopefully, and so they all, if they're the best players, then the logic is the players sort of figure it out themselves. They're not like probably the best example is the Danish scene, where it's all about having structure and an in-game leader and a coach, and people can really have a proper hierarchy and set like really specific what you want someone to do at all times. So in that sense, I want to get your take on that. For me, you've always been more like in the Danish mindset of Counter-Strike's Threat, even though you're from Sweden.
Yeah, well, I would actually completely agree, and I think it's going to sound weird, but my sort of lack of talent in comparison to the rest of Sweden. So I think the biggest curse for old school Swedish CS is we just had all the talent at the same time. And that made us very lazy. I mean, I'm not going to be naive. With the time I had on the best team in the world in Fnatic, quite honestly, like Get Right and Forest, they were pretty much better than everyone else at that point. But that kind of forced me to find a role where I could still contribute to the team. And I think in the long run, where I am today, that has really helped me, because if you just try to play on your talent, I mean, eventually your talent is going to run out. I mean, except for if you like Forrest, but I mean, Forrest is not as good as he was 10 years ago. So I definitely think that's a thing. So I think it was sort of a curse right now that we were so talented, let's say 5 to 10 years ago.
Sure. Because that's one thing, actually, we can keep this topic going. I don't know what you actually think about that, LEGIJA. I don't know how much you know about that, but like that is one of the really weird things about Swedish Counter-Strike, is that like even the best teams ever, a lot of them just don't think like tactics are that big a thing, believe it or not. They think it's sort of something you do a bit of, but they sort of are resistant to it in a weird way.
I mean, if you come from such a, like as Strat says, like back then Forest and Getroid were such dominant players. And also you have to don't forget people like DSN and all these players, they were fucking amazing players. So the team was just individually so good, I think, that they could just outskill people. And I think people looked up to that, and I think generation-wise it just kept being like that the same. So, but I think like I used to remember like back then when I think you played for Oslo Lions, possible? With this Nico, Firte and these guys. Yeah. I used to love you guys, watching you guys back then. I think you also had a different, and I think that also you guys had the same, like it was in the German scene with Mousebots, that all the top players were playing like in the best team, Mousebots and SK Fnatic back then, or NiP. And the second best team, you had like always the second best team, and alternate was kind of the same. They had their like successes, but never could make it, and all the upcoming players, I would say, they obviously always wanted to play for the biggest teams, and
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Because I do completely agree, and I do recognize that, and that kind of forced the not tier 2, but like the second or third best teams in Germany and Sweden. We sort of have to find something else, because those teams kept buying our players. It's just that simple. And now you fast forward 10 years, you're at a point where talent is not enough. Fnatic 2015 can't be around anymore. It doesn't work. That sort of died out. Now you need both. And that's sort of when, so if you don't have both, you sort of need someone, well, like me, like LEGIJA, a coach who can sort of bring that to the table, right? Yeah. I mean, we can even see that in NA, like, just look at the NA teams, EG and Liquid. They were away because of Corona from like proper practice for 6 months. And as soon as they get to Europe, it's like they're a tier 3 team in the beginning, right? And that's just 6 months.
I mean, I have to admit, like, obviously I had the experience practicing in NA at the start of this year. and it genuinely was like you practice maybe 6-7 different teams, and then if you are unlucky and a team like Liquid or like the good NA teams are traveling somewhere to Europe to a LAN, it's just impossible to practice there. And the worst thing is since you practice always the same teams, they just learn from you. Obviously, Liquid is always the most dominant team in North America or EG, and all the other teams are just catching up and learning from them, but they are not learning anything. So it's really hard for them, I think, to catch up the next level if they cannot attend to tournaments. So it was really fucking hard for them, I think.
Sure. I think we can easily tie this back in, though, this actual topic, which is like this threat. This is how we leap into the CSGO discussion then, because as people probably know, like you said, briefly in 1.6, you got the chance to play in Fnatic, but that was where you weren't the in-game leaders, so like it was inevitable that was only going to last so long. Like obviously those are teams which always stack the best players. And if you're in a team like that, you basically have to win everything, or they just make a player change. Like it's just the nature of the game back then. But your big chance in CSGO, obviously, even though you were competing for the first few years, like semi-pro, was when you became the coach of NiP the first time around, back when you could actually call. Now, if people don't know, that's why to me that year is actually epic, where you had all those like big tournament wins and the team became relevant again. It's because that was back when you could not only be the coach, but you essentially could like call the game as well, right? So how much of that were you doing? Like, were you actually calling a lot of the match? Was Exist still call? Like, how did it work back in that team?
Yeah, the first 6 months, they were sort of my puppets. I was a puppeteer of that team. I could say everything. They just listened to me. And I came in at a really good point because they were sort of desperate, right?
Yes.
Yeah, they lost Al, or they kicked Aldo. I don't know really what happened there. They had a decent year with him, but at the end, it was really messy. They had brought in Pith. I just came home from Japan, and apparently they had scrimmed, I think, for 3 weeks with the Pith before I came there, and they sort of lost every scrim. So when I arrived, they were sort of like, please do something. And which was really nice as a coach, because I could just come up with all these crazy ideas, right? And they just did them immediately. And it was, I don't know, right now, 4 years later, I don't know if it might have been a bit overpowered, because you can sort of time everything so perfectly on some of the maps. I remember our T cache was insane, because you could sort of there were always trade potential, because I could see if they messed up the timing. I would say, get this up, wait 2 seconds, okay, now you go. And that's sort of like minor details that you don't see, but I think was one of the key reasons why we won so many matches and especially became the best team on the world on cache.
Because obviously, like technically, that's what all the coaches have been able to do the whole time they've been at home now. And that's a factor no one really initially thought about. People just thought, is it online versus offline? Like no one factored that in. Like, when you say that, do you actually think it was too good? Like it was someone like you who's actually like could be a legit IGL as well. Is it too powerful to be able to like see all the screens and have all the information and that sort of stuff?
Well, it depends. I can kind of see Valve's take on it, that it becomes very different from the people at home's experience of the game, where this is one of the like difficult parts of the game, right? You have to communicate, and you will mess up all the time. I don't know if it's overpowered because everyone else could do it. I remember Starix was very successful doing the same thing.
Yes.
But I don't know if at that point, obviously, I wanted it to stay the same. But right now, I'm maybe more of it in the camp where, okay, it should actually be more pressure on the players. And that's sort of also why I want to sort of bring a new generation of Swedish CS players where they can sort of take the leadership role. It shouldn't be me.
Okay. What do you actually think about like LEGIJA? Because obviously, like Valve had like a really harsh version where they just essentially banned it, except for like a couple of times in a match. Like, do you actually think if we'd have kept it going from where it was in 2016, would it be like super OP? Like, would all the best coaches basically just be like half calling the game? You think?
Yes, 100%. I personally think also it's way too strong, just because you can, as he says, like you can rotate everyone just like puppets, because you see all the grenades. You don't have to move around and look around who has what grenades. You can coordinate every execute. Everyone can just be focused on his crosshair whilst you are coordinating the execute. So obviously, I think it would be a big advantage if you could call as a team. But I personally had always my solution for that, which was kind of my dream. How a coach should be able to talk is, I think it's in the NFL also like that the coach can only talk to the quarterback. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that the
like
coach should be able to talk to the in-game leader only.
Yeah.
But everyone else is not allowed to listen to
Okay, so it's kind of a compromise, right? Okay,
the
that makes
coach.
sense. Yeah.
And I think they could work good together. He cannot really coordinate the executes. The in-game leader still has to do his job, but he can still have impact on the game as an outside person. I think that would be a cool thing at least to test. But yeah, I'm super cool with how it is right now, though. Like, I don't have anything against it. I think it's good that the coach cannot talk during the game. But even though, to be honest, that would, if you think about it, if you're actually a good coach and you fucking call good and your team is improving, the coaches would also get more credit in some sense, if that makes sense.
Sure. I mean, I would say Threat's an example of that, since his team's been online the whole year.
There would be a big, much bigger rivalry kind of, or how can I say, kind of rivalry between the coaches as well. And everyone can also prove, okay, I'm the fucking number one, and not, obviously, I personally think Zonic is the number one, but he has fucking 5 amazing players. Obviously, it's another thing if you make those players work together, which he obviously did, but yeah. I'm sure there's coaches in teams that I value worse than, coaches.
Yeah, you can't know what they're doing. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I think this year has been really awkward with that ruling because as we didn't know when Corona would end, we sort of early decided that, okay, in scrims, I won't help the players. In official matches, I will try to keep it the same way. Obviously, if they miss on information or they forget the bomb or whatever, right? I will tell them, but I will not sort of be the puppeteer in the middle. So I haven't done that this year at all. Sometimes you can sort of use it more as a timeout call in freeze time. But I've really tried, because when you practice, you want it to be the same way as when you practice in official matches, obviously, right?
Yes.
And that has made this year very awkward. Hopefully now with the vaccine and maybe there's some sort of hope, the horizon, we will still like not use me as a puppeteer. We will still put the pressure on the players. I know maybe there are some IGLs or coaches that do that right now because they can during Corona, but I think that would just backfire when the event starts again.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's also a factor a lot of people didn't figure out, which is if you look at some of the teams that did really badly online, they were some of the best LAN teams, and I would bet a bunch of them did the same thing. Just thought, right, well, if LANs come back next month, I don't want to be like in a terrible habit of just talking all the time. So I'm sure some of them just treated it like it was offline play, but the problem is, if you're playing like the 28th best team in the world and then they don't care it's online, they're just going to take every advantage they can get. So I've no doubt that probably messed up a bunch of teams before we knew the whole year was just online. Right, to circle back again, the part where you became the coach of NiP the first time, that must also been a very weird set of circumstances, because they were a team, particularly when they had Exist as their IGL, who were like notorious for just wanting to play like their version of Counter-Strike, basically. Like they had in mind a very specific way that the game was played, and even though they as players didn't look as good, they just were in denial before you became the in-game leader. So I want to actually ask something about that, because I remember that year, a lot of the things you pushed them towards were things that were way out of their comfort zone. Like I remember like on Cash, Get Right was like practically an entry player half the time, whereas he was obviously at the time super famous for probably like the most hard lurk player in the entire game. Also, that one thing I want to ask you about definitely is that very unique approach you took, where you sort of encouraged them to like. It's like you let the enemy save 1 or 2 guns so that they sort of bankrupt. Can you talk a bit about this? Because you obviously brought a lot of different ideas, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I came back from Japan and I tried to, which was really good that I had been away from the game completely, because I saw a lot of nonsense where you had like envious, right? And they did things, and like the only reason they won because they were very fucking skilled players, right?
Yes.
I remember people had this idea that there was some sort of thing where you could money farm or like with SMGs because you get $300 more. But you can do very quick calculations, like the risk reward doesn't add up at all. I think you need an average of like 5 kills per death when you do that to make any sense. But people weren't asking these questions, right? They were just sort of, I get more money and get better score. Sure, I'm going to fucking rush with the Mac 10. And I think that was a problem for NiP before as well, because they had a style and they had won everything doing that style. But it actually wasn't the style that was good, it was the players.
Yes.
I mean, they could get into a, 3v5, and then still win the round. Did the round work? Obviously not. Like, I mean, LEGIJA, you probably do the same thing in your practice, right? Where you sort of you try a tactic and you get 2 entry kills in the site, and I don't know, Saiwu gets a 1v5 one shot with Deagle, you're still gonna like write down, okay, the tactic worked.
Sure.
Yeah, it's not like, oh no, the tactic didn't work.
Yes.
You have to stop Saiwu going crazy, right? And I think that's, I mean, it sounds so fucking basic, but in all honesty, like the Swedish scene, I can't talk for the rest, didn't even think that far. And as soon as something started to go bad again, they had the habit of sort of blaming the tactics, because they sort of remember like remnants, or like think back to when I remember when I just ran around and shot people and we won. I want to do that again. And they still haven't realized that, okay, things have actually changed. You can't do that anymore. And in that sense, what I come back to, what I said before, was that they were sort of desperate when I joined. So they did actually listen. Which was really helpful, and they did all these crazy executions. I mean, you guys remember the Kabul one where we just went all in with everything. And if someone would have told me that, what was it, 6 years before when I played with Forest and Fnatic, I would say like, no way they're gonna do these things.
So I mean, yeah, it had to have been like a big moment just that they even were open to trying it all, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually surprised when I was sort of like nervous because I hadn't been around the scene for so long. I was like, am I rusty? Do I know anything? But when I joined, I remember it was sort of, I mean, if you ever play CS with your mates, like, yeah, sort of it's like, oh, you know everything. And they just sort of become this tail and just, you have to do everything. It's like, oh, but you know best. Like, what do we do now? And that was sort of happened when I joined, which is like, I almost made me feel a bit awkward. And it took a few months for that to, I mean, what was it, like 2 or 3 months? Then we won Malmö. And I think then we found the balance, because in the beginning, I think they were a bit too desperate and they didn't really, like, you still need to take initiative, obviously. Then when we got to, I'm really sad that Pith didn't make it to Columbus, because I think that would have been one of my better shots to actually win a major. And that sounds really cocky because LG had that sick run.
Sure.
But like, considering how far we actually managed to get with like me, who obviously didn't even play.
Sure.
And we did win Malmo like 2 weeks after.
Yeah.
I think at least would have managed to get to the final.
Would have a dark horse chance for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to quickly go back to the point what you said, Duncan, with how he convinced pretty much like all these players like Forrest, Get Right,
Sure.
Exist to change up the playstyle pretty much. It's fucking hard once you hit as a team. I don't know, like let's go from back then in 1.6 with Forest and Get Right. These guys have been in the top 3 for probably 12 years in a row. And once you hit the fucking brick wall and competition gets harder and you don't know what you're gonna do, you're gonna fucking listen to anything. And for them, it's an experience they probably never really had, that fuck, things don't go anymore our way. We cannot play our style anymore. We have to change things up. So I think it's a kind of desperation thing where you're kind of forced mentally to take a different approach. And especially if you have someone, I think they obviously respected you because you guys know each other for a very long time. And I think that that helped a lot. You can take also VP as an example. Back then, Snacks took at some point over in-game leading over a Neo or a TAS, which is also pretty fucking crazy, in my opinion, because
Sure.
these guys were like by far the most experienced, have been callers in 1.6 and in CSGO. And once you fucking hit the wall and you think, okay, shit, things don't work anymore, yeah, you will take anything in consideration. So.
Yeah, on the topic of Snacks, and you mentioned this, Thorin, with Get Right, and he didn't have his, like, the Lurker role as he had.
Sure.
I think it was actually at this point, I think I was sort of happy that pushed it too far, and people sort of realized that there isn't really a Lurker role in the game in the way people think.
Yes.
If you play the Lurker role like that, the only thing that happens, let's say you go, I don't know, I don't know, we'll call it sewers on overpass, and the rest of your team pushes A. And you push A and you get sort of like a trading game there. So if you actually get the site and someone lurks from B and sort of go for a backstab lurk, the only thing that happens is that you win a round that you've already won bigger.
Yes.
It doesn't make any sense, right?
That's
you should
right.
actually sort of, you can even throw away your life for information because you won't even be in the push, right? Where everything is decided. So I think everyone sort of realized, okay, I think Happy, Snacks, and Get Right. Get Right did change because it did realize, okay, this is not viable. But I mean, Happy probably killed his career. Just keep going for this style. Like, it doesn't work, right?
Yeah. No, I agree with you completely. Basically, that it's the same as if like you say that like you can't say Zipnik's job is to win clutches. Like that's not a job. Nobody has that job. Like first of all, it's impossible. Nobody can win all of them. I don't care what his numbers are. He definitely loses more than he plays. It's like it's just something that tends to happen that he's very good at, isn't it? It's like you can't define that as a role because I do think some of those players, like Happy's probably the best example. They did get lost in the idea that was a role. Whereas to me, that's more just like it's just a player on the tactics on the outskirts, and he just looks for a time of when to flank or to stop the flank, etc. But like that has to just be every now and then the case that if you do that. It's not every round, especially because, as you'll know this, mate, like one of the reasons these guys had to stop is eventually it became so predictable to the other team. Like you could just tell based on where they are on the map what's probably happening right now. It started to have the opposite effect. Whereas a really good lurker, it's like I don't know when he's going to be there. I don't know where he's pushing. He might be within the normal pack. He might be the guy flanking behind. Like they did it every time though. I do think they went way too far with that. How did you win someone like that over then, Threat? Because I know he was a guy where he thought it was like just skill level. Like if I get back to my old level, I'll be on top again. And I know him and Forrest had that really bad, almost like a mental state. They just thought that it was about individual skill level still.
Yeah, when I joined the team, I think Get Right was still very, very skilled. So I remember I really wanted to utilize that because in my eyes, if he's the lurker, you're just wasting his skill. So I remember it wasn't like I sat down with him as like, oh, you can't be the lurker anymore. We just tried to set him up for more plays. On some maps, that did occasionally turn into sort of entry frags. I remember we sort of pushed him more to push into checkers on T-Cash. But we sort of wanted to give him the freedom. Like, okay, we're going to throw this smoke on this side of the map, Get Right, and you get to play around with it. Because we know it's going to be really annoying to play against Prime Get Right, playing around the smoke, just pushing you all the time, right? They're probably going to have to, if it doesn't get a kill, they at least going to have to over-rotate to the side of the map. So that's sort of what's the plan.
Because another thing I thought was actually quite interesting about this period of time was it makes perfect sense why you developed, like you said yourself, you weren't the most skilled player. And in your scene, to tie to what LEGIJA said, you were always in like the third best team. So you were always the guy where it's like, forget even just getting the next good player. That might be the player in the second best team. Like you have to get the player who's before that player and develop him into that player and then get the next one. So it's like, if you're in that position, I know Prodax had the same thing his whole career. Your entire career is like, right, I finally found someone. They've got some skills. Let's try and use them really quickly because like in 1 year, they might just be in Fnatic and I've lost them already. And I have to start all over again. So in that scenario, you have to understand the game on a different level. You can't just go, well, I've got the best player in this game and I'm going to use him the most effectively. You have to like somehow, I guess in some scenario, you're figuring out for these players who they are as a player, right? They don't know how to be the best player yet, right? If they some up and coming name, I mean, you had loads of them, Exist, all of them pretty much, right? Gogs, Get Right, all these guys in the original days. So what was that process like, trying to find the next talent? Because like I say, you're not even just trying to find out how good the guy is. You have to almost use him immediately because if he's good, he's going to be gone soon.
Yeah, I remember like 2009 to 11 was probably the worst years or like before that as well, where NiP took Get Right and we like Gox and you had everyone. It was almost became ridiculous. I mean, it was
of Sweden.
Yeah, Fnatic tried to get, you remember the Swedish Nico?
Yes.
At one point, and he actually said no, and that was at that point my team sort of stabilized at least. But I don't know. Yeah, it did make it a bigger challenge, and you had to learn how to sort of introduce a new player into a system over and over again. You also had to learn how to sort of, on certain maps, you didn't have the perfect players for all positions. You had to play around with that. And that actually gets me very excited for what's happening right now, where people are adding more players as well. Right? I think that's really interesting. Going for the 6 or even 7-man lineups, where you could actually start messing around with... It gives up so much more freedom on the different maps, right? Because I remember when I was in Lions, and they took a Gux or whatever, right? And you say, okay... He's a key player on Nuke. Like, they would change permaveto. Like, what do you do? Right? It was so awkward.
Sure. No, that's also another thing as well that, like, I think is actually kind of ridiculous. Is when you lose those talents as well. Like, you have to basically figure out overnight, how do I replace that guy on this spot on the map? Like, you aren't getting a new player. You've been forced to get a new player. Like, you're the one working now with, in theory, maybe even a worse player. And you have to keep going, otherwise people judge you as the in-game leader. I think it's you that fell off if the results go down, right?
Yeah, and at that point, as I said, like, it wasn't... At that time, you could play with just individual skill, and in that sense, I guess individual skill was more important.
Sure.
So I guess, especially when we lost Get Right, I think it was in Big Grip. I think that was the hardest hit for me because it was my first team. We made some success. We beat NiP in the ESWC qualifier. This is literally 13 years ago. But when he left and we sort of dropped off so hard, I mean, we tried to bring in, if you guys remember, RWA.
Old school.
I wonder how many viewers knows that nickname. We tried to bring him in like an old school player. Obviously didn't work. We got destroyed by everyone. It was just like, are we done now? And as you said, people's like, is Threat really a good IGL? Maybe it was Get Right doing everything. But it was sort of like you kept grinding it out, and even though I was only Fnatic for 6 months, I sort of, at least I felt there that I could have been the IGL, and that I sort of belonged at that level. And I mean, I went back to Lions. We weren't as good as Fnatic, obviously, but we still sort of maintained a top 10, and for quite a period of time, a top 5 team in the world.
That's one thing I want to ask about. Like, I totally get why, in terms of the politics of the scene back then, you weren't in a top team. If people don't know, like, the in-game leader back then basically did everything. Like, they were like the fucking general manager, the coach, the in-game leader, a player, usually the liaison with the organization itself, like the guy who does all the interviews. So the actual power that in-game leaders had back then was insane. So if people don't know why Threat wasn't in the top 2 teams, it's because, guess what, Khan and Robban or Valet or whoever else were already in those spots. And the problem is, they're not going to kick themselves, are they? So unless they choose to step down, you basically can't overtake them. There has to be like a mutiny in their team almost, where people just decide to kick them out, which basically almost never happened back then because these were the most successful in-game leaders. And I have to say, back then, you have to remember, we barely had stats back then. Like, there wasn't a lot of like advanced metrics. So, and remember, if we watched the games, there wasn't commentators, or there would only be commentators for big matches, and even then, they often weren't like experts. So if people don't know, fans didn't know who the best IGLs were. They just assumed whoever won was the best IGL. Like me and Lurpus, just partly because it's true, but partly just to be mean to Khan. I used to tell Khan all the time, like, you aren't even doing tactics, Khan, because you're already a fucking loose style IGL anyway, and you have Get Right and Forest Law. Like, you think you're doing, I used to tell him, you think you're doing tactics, because you won't know until you try telling someone else to do that. It's almost like that meme about Nico and Carrigan, like, that Carrigan's tactic was like, Nico, go kill. It's like, that's almost the joke. Like, that's what your tactic was, Khan. You would just tell Forest, he would run around the corner, shoot 2 people in the head, and you'd go, brilliant fucking tactic. I knew that would work. And it's like, I said to him, you won't know if that's actually a tactic till let someone not call Forest in that spot, you know. Then we'll test it out. You know, we need like a control group here. We need to figure out what's actually good. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because, like, I used to wonder back then what would happen if you'd have had a top team, if you'd have had the best talent to work with, because you were doing a great job at the level you were at, but you never really got a proper shot at a Fnatic or an SK, right?
Yeah, well, if the team would listen to me, and I'm going to sound really cocky, I think it would have really worked. I think it would have been even better. But I don't think they would have done it because they were sort of go back to the sort of Swedish dilemma. Where
sure.
In Sweden, they usually say a Swedish phrase is like "kör bara vårt spel," which basically means just play our own game. Like, just play our own game, which is like, but what are we going to do? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like, do a timeout. Guys, we just play our own game. Like, are we going A or B? Just do a thing.
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't make any sense.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's so I don't think in practicality it would have worked, though. If they would have listened, obviously I believe that my view of CS is best, so I think it would have worked.
Sure.
And then you have, like Wally and Robin, the other IGLs, and as you say, I think they were pretty much all superior to me individually, though none of them were insanely good tacticians. I think Wally was quite good at calling mid rounds. Slightly the same with Robin, but it's hard to tell, right? Sort of, so when I was on Fnatic, the team was so skilled, it's hard to know. And I mean, you sort of jokingly say, "Oh, Nico, go kill," but our tactics in Fnatic, I especially remember Dust 2, the T side, literally was go catwalk, because like you could.
That's how you know your players are amazing, when the tactics just go catwalk Legia and it just works. You just win the game. It's cool.
Yeah, I remember like Gux was so good at going.
Sick.
Yeah, he could literally outpeak Opper. So it's like, why do we even bother doing it? Right? Like, you're gonna try to peek mid, we're gonna kill you. If you're gonna kill us from a slope, we're gonna kill you. It's like, yeah, you're out of options, guys.
Yeah, that's how you know you live in a luxury life there, Khan, is if everyone else is like, how do I deal with like Marklov when he's playing the slope on like A on Dust 2? And you're just like, I just send my rifle out, just shoot him in the head with an AK. It's like, that's not even a tactic, mate.
Yeah.
Just having the best player in it.
I think the most ridiculous point, like the match I've been the most carried ever, was the final of DreamHack Summer. Our team was called Lemon Dogs, and we brought in Gux and Get Rights as stand-ins. And we play SK in the final. They had like a decent lineup. It was like Wally, Tenpole, Seth, Robin.
Yeah, still good players.
Yeah, like really good players. And I think we're down 11-4 as CT on Dust 2. And like we had Gux. So what did we do as T? Like we went catwalk, and we won like 12-3 immediately. We lost like 2 early rounds because like they couldn't stop him. It was absolutely ridiculous. I remember the commentators. It was like Joe Miller and Too Good, and it was like almost not yawning. And it's like, yeah, similar decision here again. Going catwalk.
Sure. When you say that, though, like the other side to it is this. Like, I always think of this way, right? Even if I disagree with how a team does something or their philosophy on the game, I always do take the baseline assumption that because these are some of the better players in the game, they just figured out their own way to play Counter-Strike or how they see Counter-Strike. Because I can disagree with it, but the idea is it's got to have some way that it works. Otherwise, why would they be in the position they're in? So when I look at the Swedish scene, like, as you can probably tell, I'm biased to like tactical Counter-Strike because to me that's what Counter-Strike is as a game. You know, it's like, it's not about like, do we have the best players? Like, there's very few teams are going to be in that position. It's like, how do I make use of the players I have to beat the other team, even if they've got better players? To me, that's kind of the beauty of Counter-Strike. It's almost like jiu-jitsu or something, you know? You don't have to be the biggest strong guy to win the game. You can just outthink them. But I do get why people have the best players. I understand why those players themselves, and I think I saw this a lot in the Swedish scene. If I say the Swedish scene doesn't have many real, true in-game leaders, then it has a million secondary callers. Because I think that's the other side of this threat, is like the reason why these star players don't want to play super tactical is they want to have a lot of input. And what I noticed was, yeah, you know what, if they're in their prime, they're geniuses. These, like, Flusher obviously is going to have an amazing idea of what he wants to do in a round when he's feeling his game. If Get Right and Forrest are the best players in the world, of course I want them to have some say in it. So I can see how they developed that way, because obviously it worked to some degree. These were some of the best teams ever in CS.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of big egos in a good sense in the Swedish scene where they want to take initiative. And I think that, especially in the mid rounds in CS, is really good. And you could especially see with the old Fnatic lineup, probably the best team in the world ever at doing that part of the game.
Yes.
Where they sort of improvise the mid round all the time. I think what sort of happened is you sort of have... like the opening of the rounds, let's say the train is a perfect example. You have these different protocols, or maybe Banana Inferno is even better. Like, you have protocols, like he's going to throw that Molotov, I'm going to put it out. If it put it out, I'm going to throw the HE, and it becomes like this tree of things that can happen. And what sort of happened is sort of like the protocol sort of caught up with them. So it like doesn't matter anymore. You can't sort of improvise because you're still in Astralis' box of protocols.
Yes.
And they know what to do. They know exactly how to handle, okay, you're going to 4v5. We know the best decision to make here. Or we're going to throw the HE's a banana at this timing. And at that point, like, if Fnatic, let's say they were the perfect team and they could keep up with that, they don't even have to be on par with Astralis. They can just keep up. They will probably still win, right? But they didn't. They sort of went for the Swedish, just play our own game even more, which makes them even worse. And then they start blaming each other. And then the team just crumbled. I think it was in 2008, 17 or 18, right?
Yeah. Well, that was like there's another joke I had on talk shows, because that's like a very American thing to say as well, by the way, just play our own game. Like, there used to be top pros. I'm talking about top pros, not even idiots, like really like successful players who I've heard say stuff like that to me in interviews. Like, well, we're not going to worry about what the opponent's going to do. We're going to focus on our own game. And my joke was always like, Everyone's doing that, you idiot. The first thing you do is focus on your own game, but then you need to focus on theirs as well to know where your game matches up with their game. Like, it's not a choice. You don't do one or the other, do you? You don't go like, we're only watching their demo. You do watch both. What are you talking about? Like, but I know what they mean by that. They just mean, like, if we do what we think makes sense, it's going to work. But I kind of agree with you, Threat. In my opinion, Swedish CS, this is why it's actually not as good right now, because the two good teams now, I'm not counting Dignitas, they haven't done anything. There's your team basically, which has like a bunch of up and coming players, but you don't have the experienced players yet to like be a true top team. And then Fnatic has some amazing players, but they've sort of they're just playing the same style like Counter-Strike for what, a year and a half now, along with the lineup. So like, I do think there is an area to which Swedish CS, like, this can't be the top level of what's possible. There has to be another, like they have to be able to get to the level that the Danes and Vitality and some of these other squads are at now. It can't just be stuck where it is now, right? Because the players are still good.
Yeah, that's exactly why we've started this sort of talent program now. So, like, just interviewing some of these players that's up and coming in Sweden, like talking with like people or like way below the 20 and have like 10,000 hours on Steam, and they're just looking at you, it's like, I just want to fucking play CS and win everything. And I think hopefully Fnatic will do something similar, because I do want Swedish CS to come back. And I think the best way to do that is sort of like give these players space. Not all of them are going to make it, but then that will sort of make the top players who have already established themselves sort of nervous. Like, this guy is going to play fucking a billion hours a week. Like, maybe I have to do the same, because I think there is to some degree, the Swedish scene has been content for many years.
Okay.
That's my feel with a lot of players. Is sort of like this is actually not maybe referring to only Swedish teams. It could be other teams where it's like an inflation where a lot of the players get so much money and you have a 5-man lineup, so you lose a lot, and what can you do? You can't really kick anyone, and that means it's still gonna get the paycheck, and it becomes this thing where it's like I can just sort of sit there, and the goal might be to get into that team rather than to perform while you're in the team.
Sure. No, I think that applies to a lot of different teams. The thing I want to ask about that, though, it's connected, is obviously this is when you came back the second time as the coach in NiP, was this squad basically the one you've got now. I know technically on paper they listed you when they had the Forest lineup and when they'd first brought like Plopsky and stuff, but like as far as I know, you weren't actually doing anything back then, right? You were just like very loosely working with them. So to me, the squad you've got now is like the real NiP for me. Like, and this squad here is, it's all, I know that some of them have been in NiP for a while, but to me, these are like the newer players. These aren't the classic lineup. Like, has it been what someone would hope from the outside, that because they're not the established players, they're way more open to ideas and different ways of playing the game and redesigning the game? Because obviously you weren't trying to play old school NiP Counter-Strike with this squad, right?
No, I'm trying to find a better balance here, and it's hard to tell. I think they've sort of been, and this is not a Swedish thing though, I think it's sort of the entire scene where you're sort of schooled in this puggy style of playing, where you're sort of sort of MMR ladders, if you know what I mean, where you can sort of solo queue. Because you think back into the 1.6 days, you were on IRC, you actually had to have a full man lineup where you sort of knew everyone.
Yes.
Just scrim or play whatever, right? You could play a mix, but you probably knew everyone else. Now a lot of players, they go on Face It and they solo queue, and they maybe don't even have a microphone. They just play with completely random people, and they just try to climb the ladder. And that's you can sort of tell that a few of these players, they are not used to the team play and coordination that's required, so they sort of have to relearn some things. Though these players have been really open doing that, and it's even though this year have been quite shaky for us, we have had some decent results. I still think with some more experienced players like Plopsky and Nock could definitely make it into the top 20.
Because this is actually a topic I want to talk to LEGIJA about, because I know he's of the philosophy when he was with the big guys that if you want to do a really tactical system, it takes a long time to set all that up. Like, you know, people have to learn all their part in it, other people's parts. You have to get comfortable. You have to test things out, you know. And so I know he thinks from the big days that, like, I mean, you can give your own perspective on this, LEGIJA, but something along the lines of, like, it's worth doing, but it's a massive time sink, right? Because from my perspective, like, I've seen some really interesting things out of NiP, but I actually wondered about that because obviously, like, is there a demand that you have to have results really quickly? Have you got time to implement everything you want to implement? What are your thoughts on that, LEGIJA? Well, briefly.
Well, first of all, you have to have the philosophy of this game as an approach. For us, it was like all three players of all the core players of the team, of the strategical part of the team, where this had this approach their whole life in Counter-Strike. So me, Gopi, and Tapson, we were always like this. We have to have good team play, communication. Everything has to be just on point and master everything. So I think from day one, when I saw Threat join NiP and how it changed the approach of their old lineup, I noticed that he also has a similar approach. He's a kind of perfectionist, like the old school in-game leader from 1.6 that I always thought is. Many people in the end, I heard it wasn't like that, but he wants to have a strategical game. And I think with this lineup that he has now, it's way easier for him to implement this because people respect him. He's a very, very known person and very respected in Sweden or in general in Counter-Strike, worldwide Counter-Strike. So I think it's perfect for him, and he has the best cards right now. He just has to make them the two champions. I think he has the players and the abilities to do, but his job is now to how do I shape these players? And I think it takes a lot of time, a lot of time. That's why I think a team like NiP, they should genuinely not consider any changes because it will bring their team way, way, way much more back than they have sacrificed throughout this whole year. If they stay, I think, like one more year together, I think they will improve even more and more because you have all these young people, and especially like he says, with people playing like this kind of MMR style Counter-Strike right now. And what I also say a lot these days with talents, you have to shape them also as person, way more sometimes than you have to shape them in Counter-Strike. Because for myself, for example, back then when I was young, I had no internet all day. I had maybe half an hour internet where I could play Counter-Strike because the builds were going to be too expensive or whatsoever. So what did I do? I did sports. I went to play football. And I learned in young age things about sports, like respect your teammates. Mistakes will happen. How do I push my teammates to be better? How can I be pushed from my teammates to become even better? And with the kids today who start like with 15, 14 years already playing games instead of play football, handball, basketball, whatsoever, I think you have to shape them also as persons today. So I think that Threat with the team that he has right now with so many young players, he has two different jobs than he had back then in NiP, for example. He had people with experience already. He could have worked way different. Now it's a way harder task for him to do. So it will take even more time for him to implement the perfect system for the team. Because people also react different as humans, not like outside of the game.
Yeah, you're actually absolutely right about this. This has been my biggest struggle this year, and where will change the most for next year is I had to be honest that I've, like, when it comes to leadership and teaching these young players things, I don't hold all the cards. I think when it comes to tactics and how to play CS, that I can do that, but I don't need to. Shouldn't focus everything on that now, like how to make the next cobble strat or whatever. Right? It's better to actually, okay, how can I actually get Plopsky to sort of get into a good mindset and understand that has to work really, really hard. Because these are, sometimes I even forget how young some of them are. Like I sort of put them on the same level as me, as they would be my like regular teammate, but they aren't, right? Because when I was 17, I wasn't immature. I didn't have any life experience. I was very naive about a lot of stuff. I mean, he hasn't even had had a regular job, so just getting up early in the morning is like, oh, why? No, like he doesn't really like grasp those concepts yet. But it's, I think that is the most difficult part working with younger players, and I do struggle. I get very frustrated easily. That's one of my biggest flaws. Especially when people don't understand what I mean. Even though it might have been me explaining it in a bad way, I get really frustrated, and it's. I guess you probably have had the same thing, right? And it's like you talk about a tactic, you dry run it, and you do it in practice, and it's like, no, you didn't get it. It's so frustrating. And it's like, oh, let's try it again.
One of the things that, again, why just speculating as an outsider, one of the reasons I could tell also you were trying to play like real Counter-Strike and you weren't just trying to get like a result as quickly as possible is because for the entire year I've noticed you have tried to make the map pool really wide for this team. Like you have your perma when they banned us too, obviously, but aside from that, you're basically willing to play almost anything depending on the opponent, right? Like that's not a usual way of playing. Again, that's more like, so that suggests to me you have time with the project. You're not like, you're not going to be fired in 2 months or something.
Yeah, you're right, and I gotta put in a way where I think that was actually sort of maybe a mistake in hindsight.
Okay.
Because what I've noticed is if we become good at a map, and okay, we're good at that map, we don't need to practice it as much, and we're really bad at nuke, let's scream nuke all the time. What happens is you actually become much worse on the map you're supposed to be really good at, and you sort of barely fix nuke, maybe it becomes this 40-50% map.
Sure.
And then you all of a sudden you have 30-50% out of all the maps. So it is a very, very hard balance. Like even if you have a Permavido 6 map is really hard. I'm going to put it as far as I don't think anyone has the perfect recipe for this.
Sure.
I mean, we've even seen Astralis as sort of Navi picking nuke versus Astralis. That's saying something, right?
Yes.
It is almost ridiculous how quickly teams catch up to you. I think in the first few months of this year, we did lose to a Vitality, but I think we were maybe the best team in the world on Vertigo. Okay, I'm just going to say it. We were the best in the world.
Yeah, you're really good.
And we did scrim it, but it was sort of like more on repetition. We knew what to do. And literally like 3 months after, it's like 20% win rate. It's our worst map. We even consider vetoing it, right? And it's like, shit, it's so annoying. And you have so many teams not only copying you, but anti-stratting you and coming up with new ideas. It's, yeah, it is really, really tough. And so that's sort of something, or like one of my main goals for the next year is we should at least have 2 maps that it's go-to, right? Where it's like, okay, we're very confident on these 2.
Sure. Well, the other problem as well I noticed for this year is, this is why it's also different when you have a real land circuit, is because like how you judge how much time you put into a map, how good the map is what you can get from it. Like, right, I'm going to use this map. I'm going to need to beat this opponent in the semi-finals of this big LAN, so we're probably going to need to be good on whatever. It could be training against this team. You know, the problem is when you play it online and you just play a million random games that all feel like the same game blurring into one. It's like, at that point, like there's not the same storyline even to what maps you're good at, what strengths you have. You're just trying to be your best all the time for an entire year. Like, it must have been really difficult mentally to just frame where you're going as a team, what you're trying to improve on, what's good now, what do we switch to. Must be tough this year, right?
Yeah, I think going into Pro League was the absolute worst one. We had a really good placing in Cologne. We lost to Vitality in the semi-final. We beat a lot of good teams. And then we immediately after, of course, it's Pro League. So we go home. We're not playing from the boot camp office anymore, because then some of the players would have literally stayed there for like 2 months, right? And I can't really push them that hard. We get home, and two days after, we play Vitality in Pro League, right? And it becomes so awkward. It's like, oh, it's the same maps again. We lose that 2-1, and it's sort of like, okay, we're playing. I think the second match was also versus a team we played in Cologne. And just to say, it's so hard to sort of, like, we have mental coaches, and it's just like, okay, just imagine this is you're in an arena, like try to make it. This is an offline event, but it is really difficult. And to keep the motivation up when we came to the semifinal of Cologne and we did lose to Vitality, it still gets this like, you want to like breathe out, like just relax for a bit, but it's just no way to do it. People still do it. And that's why I think Pro League, especially, and that was the one where I had to jump in for the 2 last matches, was by far our worst results. And was mostly due to, well, I could be partially to blame for this because I don't know how to handle having these many events in a row, right? I'm so used to make a new playbook, boot camp, event, rest. Now it's just tournaments all the time.
Sure. Like another problem I also see for your team is like some of those players still haven't played that many of the tier 1 lands. You know, they were like still young in their career. So unfortunately, you kind of had that robbed from this year. This would have been when you'd have had your chance to really test them. So then you know the guy's not just good, but now he's in the quarterfinals of a Katowice or, you know, some big event that you've got to sort of get under your weight. And also the other part is, when you're trying to play real Counter-Strike like you are, that's the worst style to play online, because you're playing online. And listen, that might work if you play Astralis or Vitality, you know, the real teams. But if you play 2 or 3 games the same week where it's just some random CIS team that no one knows or some team of like stand-ins and stuff like that, they're not going to play the right Counter-Strike for that to be as effective sometimes, right? It's tough to make that work online.
Yeah, especially because you keep playing them all the time. I think that is the biggest issue, because you sort of made all these tricks, you show them, and then as I said, we literally play, okay, that time it was Vitality, we could play Spirit or someone just 2 days after each other, and then it's okay, we haven't had time to prepare anything new. We and other teams actually sort of used the time between for rest, because there was no time for rest at all otherwise. And I had to learn a lot. I had to learn to sort of not be able to build the playbook, but sort of have a much more tight default with good basics, because that's much harder to punish, right? It's really hard to punish sort of, let's say, CT, Astralis, Inferno is a perfect example. I mean, LEGIJA, like, you watch their demos and you play them. It's like, because you don't know if they're going to play 3 banana and triple nade, or like, you don't know. So you can know what they're going to do, but it doesn't matter when you actually play the match, right? Because their system is so rigid. And like, you can try to copy it, but it takes a lot of practice and excellent communication to actually execute it. So I think, and that's why Astralis has been able to shine throughout so many tournaments in a row.
Right. Normally, when we do these shows, a lot of the people are like on super famous teams where everyone knows all the players. But I can't say with the last question, like some of your players are still fairly unknown. Like, not that many people, because we haven't had lands, especially. Not that many people probably really know who Nork is. Like, they know he's a skilled player, but like, who is this guy from your perspective? Like, is he supposed to be like the star player of NiP if things go well?
Yeah, I'd say he is. And I mean, we brought him in at the end of last year, 2019, when I came back in. I remember we had a lot of discussions, and in all honesty, I was a bit worried, because there was like, I think it was discussions about like Freddy Frog and like Knock, and it was like, these guys have still been in team for quite a while, but Knock was still like kind of new to me. So I watched so many demos. In all honesty, I was like, okay, he seems decent. Let's give him a chance. And I think he really took the chance, right? I think even in the beginning when we went to Blast, the first LAN event of the year, where I think we should have beaten Liquid in that match, he just played out of his mind. And I was like, wow, he could play on the stage. I mean, you were there, right, Thorin?
Yeah.
Like, it was sick, like, audience. It was really intense.
It was pretty cool.
Then in Pro League, we had a really good run and just played amazing. So I think I was a bit lucky picking Knock up, because he is very talented individually. Like, in the beginning of the year, like when I went to the team, I was just like, it's going to be Plopsky. Plopsky all the way. He's going to be the main star. But it's quite obvious now that it is Knock.
What would you say then about the way you're using him? Because I notice it's not like he's a guy where it's thought of that he has to have the AWP every round. It's hard forced around him. Like, he has it and he doesn't, depending on what side it is, what tactic it is. Like, how do you envision him within the team?
Well, in the beginning, we had a sort of maybe a bit more awkward, where we tried to have Twist up on some maps where he felt the most comfortable, and Knock where he felt the most comfortable. Then we changed during the summer, so Knock is just the main opper on all the sides. Currently, we don't know where to go with that right now for next year. I think like Knock is obviously going to be the main opper, but it would be interesting to experiment with a bit sort of what Vitality is doing with Shocks opping on some halves, where the opping is. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm going to call it now. Like, Vertigo, maybe you don't even need an op on that map, right? Maybe you shouldn't op at all. Especially in the later stages of the year, like, it became so awkward. And like, I looked at other teams, you just sort of have like one guy on B with the op. But I think there's a lot there, because playing the op is maybe to like generalizing it too much. Some maps you have to be very proactive. CT overpass, for example, you can just take over the map. But on the same map, like T overpass, you can't do anything. Like, you have to be super
true.
passive. The only role you have if you play the op on the overpass is try to predict where their op is going to peak, and you're just going to try to wait. And if it doesn't peak, well, it's going to be awkward in sort of every duel. Like, you're going to go bathrooms, going to hold long, or you're just going to wait for someone to jump bank. Like, it isn't that fun, right? And that's why I think we see Vitality not giving the op to Saiwu, because they want Saiwu to have the AK and be actually proactive.
Do you actually think, since you earlier on said you thought you're the best in the world, and to be fair, your team was pretty good on Vertigo at the beginning of the year, right? Do you actually like that map, though, Threat? Like, I can see what people enjoy about it in some sense. Like, the meta develops very quickly. Anyone who figures out a gimmick, you can sort of copy and paste theirs. There's a lot to it. I can see that's, like, enjoyable mentally, but I think it's just a really terrible map to watch. Like, when I try watching demos of teams, it's pretty boring, mate. Like, unless I'm doing it for an event, it's fucking hard to get into a Vertigo game.
Yeah, I would. I'm actually gonna agree to that. Like, the only reason I like Vertigo, and I have to be honest with myself, is because we're good at it, and it's new, it's fresh. Right?
Okay.
Yes, and that is honest, because you can sort of like boil Vertigo down to, you work A ramp, and teams have so good utility on A ramp, like you're not. That's why I say you can't op there. Like, you can't get a pick with op there. Like, you have to sort of get blinded and then just sort of flick into the sickest shot ever, and then you just risk dying. Like, that's the only shot, and then you're going to fall back. And then if you fall back as CT always have the option to turn it into a coin flip. And with the coin flip, I mean A after plants. Whereas, like, there's smokes everywhere and people jumping onto the sides and the Molotov. Sure. And, like, people pretend to know what they're doing.
Yeah, they don't, of course not.
Yeah, like, I have no fucking idea. It is as chaotic as, like, we have skilled players who get 2 headshots in the end. It's like, yeah, very coordinated retake.
Yes.
Like, yeah, I guess there's one good pop flash and it's like the easiest line ever. And now you know how to retake A.
Sure. I will even admit, like, listen, that makes it exciting if you're watching it as a pro match. Yeah, like no one knows what's going to happen on this retake. But I agree, it's not beautiful Counter-Strike, is it? It's like, there's a lot of luck involved in that.
Yeah, I do actually think Inferno has the same problems in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, whereas it's like, you're CT and it's like you have the utility trade in Banana, and then you're pushing to a situation of CT is like, we have to go 4A or 3B. Yeah. And you guess right, and have some like analyst is like, "Oh my god, Threat is the best coach in the world." It's like, yeah,
there you go.
I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. Yeah, that's actually what I'm trying to tell Amp is like, just be confident in your calls, right? It's like, guys, I have a read, go B, because at least then the players actually commit to the stack. Yeah, because I think that's one of the bigger problems with teams on Inferno. That the good teams, they do commit to the stacks. The bad teams, they sort of. It's like, we're stacking here, but we heard a flashbang on A, so maybe we should sort of see what's going on. And you're like this awkward 44 after plant, and you lose all the weapons. And it's like, wasn't the point to stack and save the weapons?
Yes.
Yeah, and then you just lose all the rounds. So,
sorry, keep going.
Yeah, that's why I think Inferno is actually quite a bad map in like tactically.
That's interesting because we had one thing in Big back then. We were so confident on our B executes or on our Inferno executes. It was during the time when we made like the top 8 to made PGL, and we won 3 games on Inferno. We were so confident in our executes that once we did our default and pushed like all the enemies back and took all the equipment, Gob always said during the round, guys, let's type in chat, we will come B. They should go with 5 people B. It didn't matter for us. We were so confident in our execute because we knew we played the round before that very well. They don't have much equipment. We boxed them into a small position where they can only be. And we just destroyed them. So it was a funny thing. That is the important thing that people, if they, what you said, like people have to commit sometimes. And even though there are 3 people, you have to be confident and trust in your execute and waypoints and also reads from your first person running in. And that's where we were fortunate with Tubson, for example. He had very good reads and destroyed teams with even more people on the bomb side.
Yeah, I remember like you really popularized this sort of heavy B executes because like if you do it properly and you have the utility ST is sort of like
it's hard for you.
Yeah, exactly. I remember SK in when Fur and Fallen were defending. I mean, they were great that year, 2017.
Yes.
But boy, were they really bad at defending B on Inferno.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
they were atrocious. Like we went B all the time. I remember it was the semi-final of Oakland. And we went B, we won. Like Fur just like he just throws a flash over the roof, like misses it, he 4 rounds out, and we just kill him, and it's like full as an op, we just go B, out trade him. And it's like, okay, we're done the 7 rounds, we should go A. They're gonna 3-man stack. Cold Sarah, like, no. And he gets like 4 kills with the op, and we just go back to B.
Yes, cool.
So the back of the track where we went only catwalk on in Fnatic. It is sometimes it really is that simple. You just need sort of just the execution has to be really tight.
I have one question for you and your team. I have in my life not ever heard communication like you and your team have. I watched a YouTube video and I said it in one of our shows already, that you guys are so quiet and calm in the most hectic situations. When I compare you to Na'Vi, to this one situation where they had on Mirage, I think they talked more rounds in 45 seconds than I heard you guys speak in a whole game, I think. It's ridiculous to me. I remember I was chilling just at night, like 2 a.m. in the morning with Taps, and he says, bro, I don't believe what I'm looking right now. And he showed me a clip of you guys. I think NiP uploaded it on the YouTube channel. You had a situation on overpass and you execute A side. And there's so many grenades and action happening, but I've never heard such a calm communication. And I was wondering, is that you bring that to the team, or is it like a Swedish thing that everyone is so, like, genuinely, I've not experienced that ever, and I didn't believe it.
I think it's a combination. Obviously, it's a Scandinavian thing. I mean, everyone knows the Finns are the worst. They're over there, they literally say nothing, right? But yeah, we really try to push sort of the communication. Like, it's really quiet, have a lot of keywords, sort of, and especially when it comes to sort of mid-round utility, just it's like A overpass, like sort of everyone has to know everything. So it's very, very, you don't have to say anything. It's just going to happen because if you've done it a million times, you're just going to see the corner and it's like, I know the lineup. And you just say, I'm smoking bank. And that is very easy for the next guy to say, I'm doing this. Obviously, there are situations that maybe we don't put in the videos where it can become hectic. We do still struggle a bit when it gets to sort of like 15 rounds. I mean, if we play sort of, I'd say Fnatic, probably get very hectic, obviously, because we know them. Yeah. And Vitality, I don't know why Vitality really is like really annoying to play against, and we get really stressed. But it's really good at Kota, and we do work on that a lot. We have like keywords where people sort of have to shut up because people have to focus. Yeah, we don't want to be the Brazilians, because I think when you're sort of let Brazilians represent the opposite side of this, right? Where you're sort of playing with so much energy. And it might work. Let's look at MIBR this past few months. I mean, I don't think they would have done these results without the energy. The problem is the dips, like when you have this much energy and you yell all the time. Because if you start losing rounds, you're basically out. And I don't think there will be any consistency in those teams.
That's actually a good point.
One of the things I think is brutal, though, is that because we're not on LAN right now, and so it doesn't feel like it's like real CS tournaments, you know, like if we went back on a LAN in 2 months, everyone will forget about this period. The other thing that's rough as well is, like, this year taking over NiP, that approach with the map pool would have been very interesting offline, though, because, look, especially now that Vertigo became a map where if you don't play it, you basically have to perma-veto it, because, like, if you don't play it, it's not a map you can just fuck around on. Like, it's so hard to play that map if you're not practiced. It's actually a very tactical map pool we have right now. Like, you can really push hard in the map pool and go basically wherever you want to go. It's not like the back in the days where we had like DOS 2 and old Inferno and Cash and Mirage, like all in the same map pool. Now there's a lot of tactics potentially available and a lot of different ways to match up in best of 3 series now. Threat has to be quite interesting.
Yeah, just looking at Nuke, which has become the most played map in a lot of tournaments.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that's absolutely crazy. I mean, you guys were around where it was first reintroduced.
It was the most hated map easily. Easily.
Yeah, everyone was like, it's fucking horrible. Like,
yes.
But I realized it is really good, and it is really interesting on the top level, because I think the top teams, especially this year, has pushed the tactics so hard on that map that there's so many different styles you can play on Nuke, which is like, I remember when we played Sprout. And it's like, yeah, they play lobby ST. And it's like, you can't just play lobby ST. Like, yeah, they play lobby ST all the time. And I was, okay, how do we play against that? Because we just thought it was really bad doing that. And you have other teams, sort of Vitality, who sort of always throw deep smokes on yard, and you have other teams that always throw the regular wall of smokes, and you have this sort of half-deep wall of smokes. And there's so many things you can do. Just talking about, like, I could write a 1,000-page essay on vent diving on Nuke, right?
Sure.
Yeah, sort of like maybe a bit sidetracked, only talking on Nuke. And the other maps, I think you have Vertigo and Train, of course, a very tactical map, I'd say. Maybe it started to become a bit like Mirage in the sense that people have started to figuring it out too much, where you throw the default smokes on yard and you sort of press the yard slightly, and then you can fold back inner. You have one guy throwing a set of smokes in alley to force a rotation from B. I don't think like that is as far as we've gotten on Train, and people are trying different things. But I haven't really seen anything spectacular out of any team on Train this year.
Because you know when those
map, right? Is it the least played map?
It's not very well often played Train, is it? Like that's usually a map people either like ban or second rotation ban. It doesn't feel like not many teams pick it.
I think it's the least played map even in the last.
I could believe that. One thing along those lines, though, is like this is one that, like, you know, when people say like a trend of who likes what map and what doesn't, because like as you say about Nuke there, when that map first came out again, the rework of it, like the only people in the whole world who said it was good was like the Virtus Pro guys in MSL, because that was like those two teams' best map by far, and they just would pick it all the time. So it's like that doesn't even count if that's the only person who says it's good. But like in contrast, you look now. In the modern day, I understand why people complain about Mirage, because even though I still think it's a good map, like it definitely does feel like the most played out map. Like if I think about what I even enjoy in a good pro match, it's just when like for example, I enjoy OG playing it just because Alexi B just picks off all the CT rotations. Well, that's not really the map, is it? That's just like one player doing something interesting. Or it's the map where like Nico shoots everyone in the head with an AK. Like that can't be a factor for a map. Like that's just a detail of what can happen in a match. So there's something about that map. I don't know, what would you do with it, Threat? Well, could you rework Mirage to still be a good map? Do we need to take it out the pool? What do you think we do? Because it does feel like it's the most played. Like everyone knows sort of the basic meta of most parts of that map, it feels like. And they're either just good at it or they're not.
I think they actually have to remove it. I think it's sort of ran its course in the scene. It's if they would sort of, if I hadn't seen the map and it was completely new, or we added a map, it's called Mirage, and I've seen it for the first time. I'm probably gonna say like this is the best map in the map pool together with Overpass. But as you said, the problem is it's way too figured out at this point. Everyone knows all the best moves, all the best counters, and it's sometimes it's sort of maybe a bit similar as Inferno, where sort of the CTs, do they want to lean forward towards A or like more towards B? Like it's because the Ts are so good at working middle. They have all the protocols for all the things. They sort of they broke the smoke into window with a Molotov. We know exactly what to do. We have a protocol for that. I just don't find it as interesting anymore, and I don't think like adding a new route or whatever could make it good again. I always just enjoy newer maps. Let's bring in, I don't know, Anubis or something crazy.
Would you be up for that, LEGIJA? Just trying like a brand new map completely?
Yes, I'm always for that anyways. Look, bro, let's take Nuke as an example. And we talked about how tight the schedule is for pro teams to even sustain a healthy 6 map map pool. Now imagine you get a fully new map in. How much harder would it be for you to first figure out this map? It's time consumable. So you hope what ended up with Nuke? Let the first teams play it, Astralis, VP, North, and whatsoever, and then you just copy their game and see. Once the meta is created, everyone just plays this one meta until every team changes the meta. But at the start, nobody can be bothered or even has the time to really put focus on the map, and we put this map on the main ban and start working a bit on their weakest map from before. So it's super hard, but I think it's a new challenge for the teams, where I think then, what I also in future want to see more often, teams working with way more coaches than 1 or 2. I think it's time where you can just have so much more advantage in having assistant coaches, not assistant coach. Have 3-4 coaches that you really fully trust. Obviously, it's a trust thing, and you have to know that these coaches are really understanding the system or the thing that you want to have out of them. But it would help you so much just if you have one guy focused on only grenades, finding your one-way smokes, finding your smokes. So training people for half an hour, each player half an hour a day, training him new smokes, showing him smokes from different spots. It will just help you so much more. It's sometimes seconds can decide in the game, and if you're sometimes seconds faster, you'll win the round. And I think right now we are so fucking deep in Counter-Strike, like Threat says, that teams have figured out how to play Inferno T-side, Mirage T-side, that it's impossible for the CTs to react. So you need people to spend time for you as a coach to figure these things out. I personally think, and that's what we wanted to do in Big. We wanted to establish a form and coach lineup. It didn't work out with the people that we wanted to have, but I think that should be the future, and it will change. I think it can change Counter-Strike 100%. 100%.
Yeah, we did actually sign an assistant coach the later stage of this year, and that's actually tying into the point of Mirage, because what happens was as you said, like, I like to have other people do my work. I go onto YouTube. Sometimes there are people who put up like 1 billion videos, and they're like, yeah, and that's actually how I find our assistant coach. It was on the topic of people pushing Mirage to the limits. It was actually Big. I'm pretty sure, it was Big, who has window smokes from the spawn.
Every spawn, yeah.
Yeah, and like not exactly every spot, but
6
then
spawns.
6 spawns, and then this guy I found on YouTube, he actually made a graph, sort of the likelihood, like a probability distribution.
Okay.
How likely it is. It's like 80% that someone who knows, if you have 2 or 3 guys who knows these 6, it's 80% chance that anyone can throw them. And what that allows you is you can get into palace quicker. You don't have to throw the smoke if you're the palace player, which means you can block the palace aggression. So there's a lot of like tiny things you gain from this, and that's actually like tying it to the point where I really like nerding myself down into these details, right? But in all honesty, like, it doesn't change the map that much. I think when it reaches that point, it's time. I was like, okay, guys, we need to change this map.
I think you just don't have the time for doing this bullshit. It's this minor. It's this minor, but with you working on the other thing and someone helping you with the minor things, it will just make it like way bigger in the end. I think the impact of having someone helping you.
Sure.
Yeah, I've just felt like Mahone, what is called
Mahone TV. Yeah, I watch it. I know all these videos.
Yeah, exactly. So I saw that video. It's just immediately sent him an email like, "You want to join NiP?"
I mean, look. That's the same thing that happened to Elma Paddy. I think.
Yes,
I think he just started doing YouTube videos and ended up in being in Gen G, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So anyone's watching this wanting to get into a top team, that is actually a really good way, because the top teams, they will look at your videos.
Yes.
Because we want to save time. I don't have time to go into a fucking GoTV demo, watch every player with like the worst fucking changing back to the round, and it takes 1 billion, the demo crashes, to find the lineups for all the players, then teach the players, then have one player forget about it, and it's like, it's so annoying. Just have a YouTube video and just like time like index for each of the grenades.
I should consider that maybe. Can you make good money off that, Duncan?
I don't think you get that much, unfortunately. It's more like Threat says. It's a good way to get your name out there, though, because this is the sort of thing where the genius of it is this. You don't need 100,000 people to watch that video. You just need the right 100 people that contains Threat and someone else from another team. And as long as that person sees it, that might be all it takes. You just need the right person to see it. Exactly.
And bro, with social media these days, you can make yourself, you can get your attention from every single person.
You want to know something brutal, by the way, LEGIJA? This is one topic we didn't address here, right? Which is that in Threat's career, he almost had, in English you say like he zigged when he should have zagged, like he went like the wrong direction. He almost fucked it all up, LEGIJA. Because remember, he played 1.6, and I can tell you right now, I won't do it because it'd be depressing. But if you go and look up on the esports earning website, Threat's not going to have much prize money. Because remember, he was in like the 3rd best Swedish team. So even though, he was in some good teams, he's not going to have much prize money because prize money was small in 1.6. And if you remember, his era was super top heavy. It was like top 3 in the tournament, got nearly all the prize money. And then in CSGO, he was playing in the early days, but he was playing for a bunch of those like semi-pro Swedish teams, basically. And then right at the moment when he got the offer to be the NiP coach, basically, he even tried to sort of bail out of that and go to like Japan for a while or something. So it's like you almost missed the whole period where it was famous and there was loads of money. Threat. Like you just got back in time, mate.
Yeah, I think I was a bit lucky, and also sort of lucky that I knew the right people that got me back into the scene again. Because just playing off my 1.6 merits, I don't think that would have been enough.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard because I do when I'm doing esports, I'm very much all in with the team I'm working with. So having sort of like I went back to school, I finished my master's degree, and it for me that's sort of just security in some sense. Because if this would drive me mad at some point, I do have something to lean back on. Because and it's actually because I'm so passionate about it. Because it's very hard to do it 50%. Or it's like, okay, I'm just an analyst now, which I tried for NiP. It's like that didn't work, obviously, because it's like you get really frustrated. Why are you guys doing this? Why are you guys doing this? And all of a sudden you're sitting there again, and you're the leader. It's like, how did I get here?
Makes sense. Yeah.
It's good, but speaks also for yourself. I mean, not being like the best in CSGO, and people still, and a team like NiP, like one of the most like hyped team back then, asking you to coach. That speaks obviously for yourself, and people would probably know why they did it. So.
And also, as you say, you basically had to earn your respect back in CSGO and get people to actually care about what you think of this game. Because it's easy to forget now, because nowadays, there's just been so many years of CSGO. Almost anyone who was from Saucer 1.6 who put in the effort probably got half decent because they've had enough time to get good at a new game. But I remember when the game first came out, CSGO, dude, loads of people who were from 1.6 were just terrible at the game or just didn't know anything about it. We're trying to take concepts from like how DOS 2 1.6 was played. And like, I've told this story before, so I won't say who it is, but there was like a really legendary Swedish person who once told me like how all the teams in CSGO are playing like DOS 2 wrong or something. But the problem is he was on some like boomer shit from like 2005 from 1.6. And I was like, dude, I know why you think that because the map looks the same. But I was like, in CSGO, it doesn't play at all. There's like, he thought, for example, that like teams should play like, 2 CTs on Catwalk as CT or something. I was like, dude, this is an idea from like a different game 10 years ago. What are you talking? So my point is, people were pretty skeptical actually. You had to sort of prove yourself again in CSGO. I've noticed that, which is legit. Everyone should have to do it, in my opinion. But yeah, basically, like you could basically threat. You right now could just be a guy on a different channel, on like video on my YouTube, like, yeah, I used to play back in 2008, but CSGO never happened for me. You got the perfect time. They even banned coaching like less than a year after you started doing it, mate. Yeah. You got to show off all your skills. It was perfect.
Yeah, I am really proud about that, and I have to sort of give myself some credit. I think I'm sort of really good at sort of calling bullshit, or like when players, maybe because I've been in the Swedish scene when I've seen so much bullshit, and I've seen because like people being lazy and they're so talented. Yes. And the classic thing is, I'm sitting there. It's like, if I was that talented, la la la. If I was that talented, I probably would be lazy too. I don't know. But then I've seen it, but then like gives me the perspective of like calling out bullshit. Like for example, like sort of the forcing every round envious and sort of going on eco hounds, which is, I mean, I remember when I saw that, and that's what I realized I could really become a coach because this is sort of objectively stupid.
Yes, of course.
You can actually measure it. That is bad to do it, and they're doing it. I was like, take a second, write down on the paper. It's like, here it is. Yes. You shouldn't do it. But you're doing
but you know what's crazy, by the way, is that's a perfect example of way back in the day where Lurker actually nailed something that all fans were telling him he was wrong about. He was so on point. Because back then, obviously, when they first invented force spies in CS, especially when like the CZ was overpowered as fuck, it was worth it. Like it was so cheap. It used to be $300 to buy. It was like insanely overpowered. And if you had a couple of them, like your chances as a CT team was pretty good at getting back in round if you like stack a couple of people behind a corner or something. But what Lurker's even said back then that he was right about was this. He said, yeah, they do it now because it's correct, but just wait, and even when it no longer makes any mathematical sense and it clearly isn't right, they'll still all do it. And the reason why is this, and he's so right, is at the end of the day, we all want to believe we're like true sportsmen and that we're playing this like it's chess and there's all rules. No, at the end of the day, even pro players still, like the word player is in it. They play, it's fun. They do shit for fun in the game. And so he was right. He was like, basically the reason they'll always force spy is because even when it doesn't make sense, they want to have a gun. They don't want to just have a save and just have a Glock this round. Like they don't want to know the round's lost. They want to feel like they have a chance with a deagle and go. Like it sounds crazy if you're a fan because you think like, what the hell? Don't these guys get paid like 25k? But they do. But we're just not at the level of pro sports yet, guys. Like, people are just doing stuff for fun. They just did, like you're saying. Like, there was like a whole year where it was objectively wrong how they would force buy like that, but everyone in the world did it.
Yeah,
Everyone.
Yeah, I have a funny story from this year with my players, actually, so I'm going to call them out a little bit here, but they're really good at listening to this. So I think it was CT Inferno, because a lot of teams have been struggling on the CT force buy, because a lot of teams do this where they lose the CT piss around, and they always go for the force buy on the second and a full leak on the third. Like, that's sort of the default way of doing it. And that's sort of like, if you actually start like counting, like doing the math, it's like it actually makes sense if you have quite a decent success rate on the second round. Yeah, anyway. But my players, exactly like you're saying, they just want a force buy because it feels really good. And it's like, they always remember the 3 leagues they got through the being Inferno. So, and I looked through the numbers on our CT force buys on Inferno. I went through all the maps. And I found some like really interesting things. So like I asked them, it's like, okay, guys, you say like you should definitely force by CT Inferno, right? Because like you win it. I'm like, yeah. It's like how many like the percentage of win rates? And they try to be humble, like it's not 50%, but let's say we win like 35-40%. It's like we literally never won it a single time.
All right.
Yeah, okay. I thought the data was wrong, but like I went back and looked through all the demos. It's like something that must have been a scream or something. Like never done it, boys. So it's like either we come up with something new or we stop doing it, right?
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
No, because that's also the problem with pros, isn't it? It's like, I get it, because a part of being a pro is like you're just living in this moment now and you're just doing what you think's correct at this moment. But the problem is they sometimes don't think of the bigger picture. Like in that case, like there was a similar story that Khan once told me where he once tried to argue with Gox about whether it's correct to like peek in a post-plant scenario where you're the one with like you're the terrorist defending the bomb. And obviously you can just make the CT go and tap the bomb, can't you? I always used to go mad at this with my teammates, mate. I would always say like, mate, he has to physically touch the bomb or kill you. Like you can control where he can move right now. Like, you know, if you think different about the problem with being really skilled players is they just think, well, it's like Zantares does now big. They think I'll just peek and shoot him in his head and then I'll win as well. And it's like, well, that's brilliant, but like I'm not you, so I can't do that every time. So to me, it's like, why would you waste your time? Why not like play the highest percentage scenario? And the story goes like this. Gox told him like Khan was trying to do it like the Socratic method, you know, where you just ask them questions and you hope they arrive at the answer themselves and just instead of telling them what they should think. So he was telling him like, well, how often do you think you win those scenarios where you peak instead of, you know, just using the time? And he was like, maybe like 80% of the time. And he was like, no way 80%, like, you know, maybe, listen, you're really good, so maybe like 60%, 70%. He's like, nah, pretty sure it's 80%. And the point here is players just like remember, however, they're just remembering one time it happened, and in their brain it's like, yeah, that works. Like, there's no way he looked at those numbers, because there's no way it was 80% in these like 1v1 duels. Nobody in the world. But players just have a different way of thinking. Like, their idea of comfort is very different to what coaches.
The most mind-blowing thing about this is because I will going back to the force buy on CD Inferno for us. I thought it was like 30% at least. Right?
Sure.
Yeah, I thought it. The problem is now that you have the data, why would you argue when you have data like that? That's the stupid thing. It's sort of, especially when it comes to, I think all teams do this. I've done it before. I think a lot of other teams, like when it comes to pistol rounds, it's like this team is good on pistol rounds. On this map, they were like, and they just see the pattern is like, I don't know, Fnatic, 3 pistol rounds in a row. Oh, they're so good on pistol rounds. And then you really look at it, like through, I guarantee you, if you look at the statistics from this year, the best team in the world on pistol rounds, I would be surprised if it's higher than 55%. Like maybe it would be like 58. That would be like insane.
Yeah.
Because it is much closer than people think. Even when it comes to regular rounds, I looked at Prime Astralis in 2018. Their win percentage of rounds, like they won every tournament, right? Those
It felt like it, yeah.
Yeah, they had 55% win rate in rounds, and that means so. Let's pretend you're a team that can win 60% of the rounds. You would be like by far the best team ever, ever, right? But Gux, he did win 80%
in his mind. Yes, exactly. No, apparently I've heard it's the same apparently in like tennis, that if you ever look into it, that like the best player in the world only wins something crazy like something like this, like 56% of the games or something, you know. But the idea is that's how small the margin is to be the absolute best, or to be, you know, the 100th best guy. Like it's not even that large. No, but that's the problem though. Players always exaggerate in their minds. I'm amazed you actually had the data there, because like the idea it never ever happened, but they thought it was like 50%. It's pretty crazy. Never even happened once.
Like, I didn't even believe it. And I was so surprised, like, yeah, we think it's easy, but it's like, in reality, we've never done it. Like, it's
What about this? One thing I want to ask you about is this. I know from talking to a lot of coaches that another thing that annoys some in-game leaders and coaches is that to a fan, they just say, well, just look at Astralis. Like, why don't you just do things the way they do? And it's like, listen, first of all, there's a lot of in-game leaders don't even have the same philosophy that they do, so it wouldn't work anyway. But more importantly, even if as an in-game leader or a coach, you have a philosophy where it would be like, I would say it would just be nice to. Forget doing it. Like, it would just be a luxury to be able to play the way Astralis does. The problem is you might not have the players to do that. You might not have the organisation that'll give you the time to set it all up. Like, maybe they just want someone to come in, get the 5 players they have now and just do 2 placings better in the next tournament. Like, different organisations have different philosophies. So I feel like fans are really underestimating how hard it's going to be to implement a team like an Astralis in any other organisation. It's going to be really tough.
Yeah, you need. I think LEGIJA talked about this before, where it's like they have such a good set of players who really work hard, and it's quite clear. I think I could make the case that they have the best communication out of all the teams in the world, right? And it's really showing, because sort of like you can look at their seeding Inferno, and I understand the theory behind everything they're doing, but executing it is actually quite difficult, right? Because you have to do things on the other side of the map, and it's to be timed perfectly. And people find these windows, like, let's talk about Arch on Inferno, right? People are so good at hitting the timings when you're rotating back to B and throwing the smoke, yada, yada, yada. But Astralis is like, they understand these gaps, and they sort of just master the execution of like the basic theory so well.
Yeah, go on.
Do you think, though, it's... How can I say? How much do you think actually Zonic had impact on that? To making these players, or like the puzzles that he has, or the pieces that he has, to make them such a strong lineup? Or do you think like the individuals of them are just all 5 exceptional players? Like, obviously picked from Zonic in the end, I would say. And very smart picks by him, but do you think Zonic has a very, very big impact on how these players are actually playing? Or do you think, okay, these guys are just the 5 best Danish players, the 5 best players in Denmark, and it sort of is kind of like for Khan back then in 1.6 with the Swedish players?
I think Sonic is one of the best coaches in the world, though I don't think involved with sort of, okay, I think he's slightly involved with the tactics of the team. I might be wrong here. But especially knowing him from 1.6, he wasn't a tactician by any stretch of the imagination. That was Abe, right?
I know, yeah.
Who did all the job, all the work. And so I think he just found a really good set of players, and he's just really good at making it work with these 5. I probably would say he's like much better than me at like dealing with conflict in the team and how to deal with conflict of interest in the team, like I want to hold B, and like how do you solve that, and everyone needs to, it's like they cannot be too comfortable, but you sort of don't want things to be awkward between them. And I think he's really good coach at that, in a combination. Like, it's always a bit of luck when you get a really good set of players. It's the same thing with Vitality. I mean, when they picked up Saiwu, like, do you think they like, oh, he's going to be this good?
No one could know, of course.
No.
Yeah, exactly. No. Of course, there's some luck involved. I mean, I was slightly lucky with Nock, I'd say.
Yes. Sure.
True.
This video was kindly supported by Lager15, Pronogo, Mohammed Alabdul Razzaq, Dean Tanglis, Animosity, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Hades, Jensen Goh, Zoomba, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Do you want to ask me a question in one of those monthly AMAs I do? Would you like teasers for who's going to appear next on my content? Or would you even like to take part in one of those crazy donator discussions I do where we go all over the place? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skruilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.